An 11-year-old boy shoots himself publicly during an online learning session. I guess our health overlords would take the incident more seriously if despair could be contained with a simple mask. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today we start with a completely tragic and unnecessary story where in California, an 11-year-old boy attending a Zoom class for his public school tragically took his own life in class with everybody watching. And then go back to what I said at the tease. This is not going to become a big story. This is not. People are going to shake their heads. People are going to think it's a shame. People are going to inevitably write this off to mental illness. But the reality is that the disease has taking a back seat now to the cultural devastation that is being laid in the wake of this. We've talked for a long time about how educrats, not just educrats, politicians, the Biden campaign, anybody who's interested in unmaking American liberty and freedom and creating a completely controlled, completely under the thumb of government, new United States, they're reveling in this. And among the many consequences for this kind of new behavior, using COVID-19 as a cynical opportunity to break liberty in this country, and by that, I mean people's rights to stand up to their own government, people's rights to own guns, to go to church, to violate. It just boggles my mind that all the doctors bow before Black Lives Matter protesters. That has to be allowed. But protesting to go to church on a Sunday now is considered anti-American. And this little boy shooting himself is a consequence. He is a casualty of this exploitation of a worldwide pandemic virus, one that he certainly wasn't going to die from, and almost nobody his age was ever going to die from, and his parents weren't going to die from, even if they all got it at the same time. That bullet is a bigger indictment than what's happening with COVID, and it's just completely unnecessary, Katie.
Well, what happened is the boy shot himself, as you said, on a distance learning Zoom call, and it's debated now whether or not it was intentional.
Right.
So the initial story said that it was intentional, that it was a suicide. Later on now, the parents of Adam Lanos said it was an accident. Either way, it's a tragedy. And like you said, it's not going to get as much national attention. I actually only heard about it on more conservative news sites because they actually care about each child's life, unlike what's happening on the mainstream media where they're just talking about Biden all the time. Now, Adam was a student at Woodbridge Elementary School, and that is part of the Lodi School District. So the parents, as I said, later came out and said it was an accident. We're, again, not sure, so I'm going to keep reiterating that we don't know if it was a suicide or if it was actually intentional. But what happened is he was on his Zoom call in his class, and he had muted his mic and his camera was off, I believe. And then his sister actually heard the shot and went in and saw that he had unintentionally shot himself in the head. And according to Sandra Mendez, the public information officer for the sheriff's office, said that it was around 11 a.m. and they responded to it, and that he had the apparent head injury and that he didn't make it. But something that is kind of interesting to note is the response, I guess, from the school. They did the next day then put up a message in social media telling, families, students, everyone, that you matter, we're here for you. They had these balloons that they put up and a bunch of red Solo cups. You can see that they made a big heart about it. It's a tragedy all around, but it does go to, as you pointed out, the greater indicator of what this pandemic is doing to our kids.
You matter, we care about you, and yet it was put up at the school where nobody's at, right? These memorials that are put at, that itself is a testimony to just what the problem here is. There are no school children at the school to create their own testimonials, to remember the young boy the way they might do if you actually had class on campus. And so you've got an empty, what a symbol this is, an empty public school site adorned with some remembrance of a boy who wasn't allowed to go to school there anymore. It's just, and no students there to mourn him.
This is true. Well, and just, I looked up some statistics. The nationwide suicide rates, again, we're not sure if it was suicide or not, but this is just bring to light.
Well, he killed himself. One way or another.
It was self-inflicted.
Right.
True. Nationwide suicide rates, ages 10 to 24, because that's the age range, it increased 47% between 2016 and 2018, and they expect it to be even higher now in 2020 because of COVID-19. Here's just one little example that I found. Cook Children's Hospital, Fort Worth, Texas, okay? I just was able to find a stat from one small little place, one hospital. They saw 29 kids in August alone for suicide attempts, 192 in total. One hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. Multiply that how many times across the nation? And some of these attempts were made by kids as young as 4 years old.
Yeah.
And Kia Carter, who is a medical doctor of psychiatry at Cook Children's Medical Center, said, what we've learned is that kids are getting to the point where they're becoming more hopeless with trying to get out of the house or some of the social activities that they're doing. And then they said, overall, most of the self-harming for suicide are girls ages 13 to 15, which if you've ever been a teenage girl, no teenage girls, that does make sense, but all in all, it's tragic.
Well, and what drives a 4-year-old to want to kill themselves? You know, this statistic you just gave me, 47% jump.
And it's increased between 2016 and 2018 is the latest
just those
stats.
2 years,
Yeah,
right?
just those 2 years.
Let me ask you a question. What if you had that kind of an increase in suicides among transgender kids? How quickly do you think this would be a national point of concern? How immediately do you think that the educators and the politicians would immediately rally around those kids and do whatever it took to stop it from happening, even opening the schools if necessary? But these kids aren't these kids. These aren't kids they're not privileged to be gender confused in this weird new world. They're not inner city minority kids. Alas, we'd care a lot more. They're just those kids who nobody really cares about. And if they're part of the casualty numbers from COVID, so be it. More white people need to die. Maybe if white silence is violence, maybe this is sending the right message. Just off yourself, accidentally if necessary, to meet the quotas, right, for what's acceptable and not acceptable in this country anymore. And if you're going to start doing, which we already have seen for the last year and a half, these ridiculous and mandatory Black Lives Matter and mandatory racial training, if you're going to keep telling kids who clearly aren't black, that they shoulder an unusual burden for 400 years of racism, a legacy of racism, if that's what you tell them, their role is in a corrupt country, well, what's the point of sticking around?
So we're moving from tragic to just utterly disturbing. Jeffrey Toobin, move over. We have an even grosser male on the masturbating spotlight, as I will just say it. I'm just going to be blunt with you. We have an unnamed and an unclothed male teacher from, Tottenville High School in Staten Island, New York, who was seen, again, remember, naked, masturbating during a video conference / a Google Meet call. That's what and Google Meet is where he displayed some. Anyway, police have gotten involved in this situation. It's an ongoing investigation. We're not really clear if students saw anything, were involved with anything, or if he intentionally exposed himself. But even unintentionally, knowing that you're on a Google Meet call, why would you even think like, oh, I clearly have a camera open and I'm not talking and I'm muted, but I'm just going to be over here, doing things.
Well, we've seen a lot of people make mistakes, right? We've seen a lot of newscasters that were doing the broadcast from home and their husbands in the background getting dressed for work.
That's different.
It's
not
accidental.
You.
But let me take a contrarian and incredibly sarcastic view of this. Hey, Mom and Dad, what are you so upset about? This is what they're teaching your kids, right? By the time they're elementary school, they're teaching them how to pleasure themselves. They're teaching them that every aspect of sex is wonderful and joyous as long as you choose it. He made a choice, right? He made a choice. Maybe he enjoys being watched by little kids. How many times have we done this show? Right? He might enjoy being watched by little kids. And when you tell those little kids that they can't, how do you tell the kids that sex is whatever you want it to be? It means everything, and it's completely personal. And every aspect of sex is to be celebrated. That there's no really sexual deviance out there anymore. And if this guy was at home and he was taking advantage of his own he's using his own body for what God made it for, sex apparently, and these kids got to see that, well, can't we just add it to the lesson? I mean, what better way to show kids what you're already teaching them?
Gross. Well, City Department of Education spokeswoman Danielle Filson said this extremely disturbing alleged behavior.
Why does she hate the nude male body? Why?
has absolutely no place in our schools and was immediately reported to the NYPD.
It does have a place in your school. Are you kidding me? It's exactly what you're teaching kids. You're teaching kids that as soon as they're able to recognize what they're doing, they should be playing with themselves so they don't have to play with others. How about that line we've heard from the public schools, right? The more we get little children attuned to their own bodies, the more we enable them to play with themselves, the less likely they will be to play with others. And unwanted pregnancies will just absolutely plummet.
Are you now doing the health lesson voiceovers?
This is my...
Is that what you're doing?
Pro-masturbation guy voice
goodness.
from the schools.
I never want to hear it again. According to, as well, Danielle Filson, the teacher was immediately reassigned away from students pending the outcome of an investigation. But considering the students weren't even remotely there because they're not in school to learn, they're not being
just reassign them to sexuality teaching.
That's true.
Right? And then the kids can get naked with them. How about that?
When they say immediately reassign, the union will take care of them. Don't you worry about it. It's New York. It's Staten Island.
Don't just pay him to sit in a room and watch porn. Yeah, masturbate. Don't just pay him for that. Put him in charge of teaching kids masturbation skills.
Yeah. By the way, Tottenville High School, I looked it up. They're home of the Pirates. Insert your own joke. Maybe
top pirates?
Top pirates. Maybe, let us know in the comments. What's the top comment there with being a pirate?
Avast ye, matey, will you help me put on me peg leg?
So, for any of those students who were in Staten Island at Tottenville High School, maybe they should have been like the students in Alabama who aren't attending classes online, and they would have maybe escaped, although again we don't know for sure if any students saw the masturbating teacher, but they at least for sure wouldn't have seen anything, because in Alabama we can't get students to go to class even once. Apparently, State Education Superintendent Eric Mackey has made the claim that more than 5,000, is it Alabamians? Alabamians?
So.
Alabama, let us know. 5,000 students in Alabama public schools have not attended not even one little day of class since they switched to part-time, even in-person teaching, like doing part-time in, part-time out. Nope, 5,000 kids, just poof, gone.
Well, it's probably more than that, and this is probably true of many states not across the union, not just Alabama. But, again, I play radical... dispositive thinker here for a moment. What are they missing out on? Did they get their daily dose of tubin? That's the word. And for those of you out there who missed the first story here, missed the story that we just did, to engage in self-autoerotic activities on the tube. Get it? T-U-B-U? That's tubin. So what are we sparing these Alabama kids from?
Well, I don't know, but...
What are they missing?
Well, it doesn't matter what they're missing. It's the fact that Eric Mackey is concerned. He says, I'm very concerned about it.
He's the superintendent of public schools.
It's a very difficult year instructionally, and that doesn't even touch the surface on the issues we will have with these 5,000 students who are not in school, and we don't know where they are. We've lost your children is what they are admitting.
The real takeaway
lost your children,
but it's
okay.
Takeaway for the educational professional is we can't control them. We don't know where they are. Who cares? It's Alabama. Let's just put it this way bluntly. They're not in the top 40 states when it comes to educating your kids. That's just unfortunately true of the entire region. And so the reality is that when you had those kids, you couldn't teach them or you wouldn't teach them. They were guinea pigs for the same kind of nonsensical left-wing ideology with regards to sex and everything else that our kids are being subjected to. It just is interesting to me. I'm waiting for one of these educators, one of these union bosses, one of these superintendents to say, hey, this is going to impact your kid's ability to read for the rest of his life. It's going to lower the quality of life, lower the job opportunities, educational opportunities for your children. Just once. Other than we can't control them. We don't know where they are. They're off our grid, right? We can't keep stocking up on all sorts of personal and private family information because the kids are on our databases. What we're concerned about is somebody else might be channeling them instead of us. Somebody else may be exploiting those kids, not us.
Well, that is actually kind of interesting considering they do have basically all the data on your kids. How could they have lost them? I don't know. But Mackey said of the students who have not showed up, a small number likely chose to leave the public school system to be enrolled in private schools. More students have started to return recently, he said.
Seriously, how do you not know who's gone over to public schools or private schools? It's not that difficult.
It's not, but you just wait for your blood to start boiling because even though they've returned now, we know like the third week in September, the third whatever they're called, the enrollment counts in September, that's what determines how much money you get. So they're not, these kids that are returning now aren't being reflected in the official enrollment count.
And that's costing Alabama public schools money, and there's your big problem.
And now he's looking for ways to alter how the state legislature funds school districts by, whether or not they're in person or not.
And I pretty much can guarantee you that his plan is going to be that the public schools are fully funded for kids even if they don't show up.
Well, according to him, you read what he says. He says, currently, the formula is set up for districts to receive funding for teacher units per so many students. He said he's currently researching how the formula could be temporarily altered to avoid the shortfall. One route could be to take the average enrollment number over the past couple years for districts, and based on that, then the funding will come. So
how about this, Mr. Superintendent? How about we play the game the right way? For every kid that you fail to educate to grade level, you lose his funding. How about that? And maybe to make this fair, for every child you're unable to get to grade level in math and English, so if you can't get them to grade in one area, you lose all that funding. And if you can't get them to grade in multiple areas, you lose that child's tuition dollars and another one. How about that? Where's the accountability? They want endless ability to redefine things so they get all their money, and there's not a single shred of anything that requires accountability from them.
But what they're going to do is they would twist that and say, oh, okay, and then they would just alter what it means to be to grade
they're doing
level.
That anyway, social.
Well, exactly, but then they would even if you would test the kids, then they would just make that test even easier. We know they're just going to make it easier.
I'm not convinced. If you're not teaching kids at all how to read, I'm not convinced you can make a test easy enough for these kids to pass.
Well,
and by the way,
is the Dominion voting system involved in grading these tests of some sort?
There's that. They're cheating the system here. And the other thing with plummeting enrollments, with plummeting births, even with COVID, I saw a statistic. We're down, right? Even with COVID, when everybody was stuck at home and everybody was saying there's going to be a COVID surge in births,
now they say
we still have a situation where not enough births to replace current population.
Half million,
right? But 500,000 babies less.
Some of us are doing our part, so back off.
That's
now,
right.
Moving on. Here's a little funny for you from Mr. Mackey. He said, "Oh wait, I'll wait for you to make sure you're not drinking here while I say this." Okay. I have every expectation that once the pandemic ends, all of those students will come back. The instructional problem will exist, but hopefully financial issue will be taken care of.
They'll come back, we'll get paid, and things can go back to normal. When they're not sitting at home doing nothing, they're sitting in our classrooms doing nothing. Isn't that the way? I salute you, Alabama. I salute you. You're one of those states that you're an enigma to me. That on the one hand, you have a devastatingly poor education system. On the other hand, I can't see why that's a problem. I'd almost rather have the kids out there playing in the hot cotton. I'd rather have them romping over cotton fields than going to some of these schools.
Is that Roll Tide?
Roll Tide.
It's time for some real education. The Lamentation of Christ is a tempera on canvas painting dating from 1480 by the Italian Renaissance artist Andrea Mantegna. It portrays the body of Christ on a marble slab. He's watched over by the Virgin Mary and St. John and St. Mary Magdalene, weeping for his death. Andrea may have made this painting for his personal funeral chapel. It was found by his sons in his studio after his death and was sold off to pay his debts.
Yeah, this is a really interesting painting, Mike. If you go to the bigger shot there, you get a sense of the first thing that jumps out of us is just how shockingly capable Mantegna is in presenting. This is the major attraction of this painting, how he projects the body of Christ into your viewing space. Notice that the very border of the slab on which Christ lies, his feet hang over that slab, which means they hang over the boundary of the picture and they project themselves into the space in which you are watching the dead Christ. So the immediacy, this is pretty shocking, right? This foreshortening technique is a relatively new thing in the Renaissance. It started in the very late Middle Ages, and they were getting better and better at, as you can see here, adding dimensionality here to a painting. And so there's a clear distance, even though this is all a two-dimensional surface, there's a clear depth here that you have that most painters were never able to achieve. The head of Christ reclined on a pillow does seem to be 6 feet or so behind those feet that project themselves into your viewing frame, and you can see the hideous wounds that the nails made when they were driven through those feet. You can see the nail marks on the reverse side of the hands as well. And when you look at the image, you really do get a shocking sense that something very tragic has happened. But one of the interesting things about this painting, even though it projects itself into your viewing space, it makes you uncomfortable by leaving the frame of the picture and meeting you where you are. And the reason for that, by the way, is very spiritual. Christ's death is not a time-bound thing. Christ's death and resurrection is not bound by the time in which it happened. It is a salvific act that is for all people who ever lived. So having the feet of Christ project into our space is perfectly valid if you go back to the picture. But in spite of that, in spite of the emotion of the scene, it's a remarkably unemotional scene. Even the weeping, go to the next image we have, Mike. Even the weeping women, while they're powerful in their grief, they seem somehow separated from him. If you look at the poignancy of the despair as one grieving Mary turns to another grieving Mary, and you can see the depth of their sorrow, go back to the main picture, it's as if that sorrow is relegated to that upper left-hand part of the picture, so much so that it almost fails to register with us. And if you measure the simple physicality of the body of the dead Christ, how big and large and heavy, even in death, it is, compared to how small those mourners look. I mean, on the one hand, it could be a conscious issue of suggesting to the viewer that you mourn up until the day he gets up again, right? That this mourning is a fringe thing. Mourn for him, but there's more joy than mourning necessary. The idea that this is a very robust Christ who will not stay dead is a powerful one. The theme of the lamentation of Christ is common in medieval and Renaissance art, although this treating, dating back to a subject known as the anointing of the Christ, is unusual. It's unusual in a lot of ways. Most lamentations show much more contact between the mourners and the body. Rich contrasts of light and shadow abound, infused by a profound sense of pathos. But the realism and the tragedy of the scene seem to override those images. You don't see Mary Magdalene clinging deeply to the body of the dead Christ like you would see in other versions of this. So it's a really complicated picture. And I'll go one more last quick look, Mike. That body is very much in the tradition of anatomy that we have often looked at on the Dr. Duke show in these particular sections about why the human anatomy, human dissection was just beginning to take off. What you also have here is a anatomical study. It's a dead body on a slab, and it's very difficult by the time you get to the 1480s and by the time you get to Montaigne's painting to separate the mourning of the dead Christ from the themes of anatomy and public dissection that were taking place in the culture at the same time.
Well then, before we go, just a reminder that the best way to keep up with our various shows here at Freedom Project is to follow us on Parler. So just take a quick few moments today and follow at Duke Pesta, at Katie, and at Freedom Project. Now, we want to take a moment to show some love to our Patriot Club members because they're the ones who actually keep this show going. So today, we're going to give a shout out to Ryan from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, not too far from us. Thank you, Ryan, for supporting the show. And if you are a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support the Patriot Club, and we're going to send you an awesome, stupendous, totally rad tumbler. All you have to do to sign up is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. Now we're going to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. We're going to go to Alabama, where we were earlier in the show, and we're going to go all the way back to 1836 when Alabama was the first state to recognize Christmas as an official holiday. And totally unrelated, but more importantly, Channing Tatum is from Alabama.
I have no idea who Channing Tatum is. None. Zero, zip, nada. I will simply say this about the Patriot Club, ladies and gentlemen. This weekend, hundreds of thousands of viewers were available to watch the Dr. Duke Show. Facebook limited it to 5%. Only 5% of our hundreds of thousands of followers were able to access the show. That shows you that we are being demonetized, that the progressive left is coming after us like they are coming after any media that does not toe a radically progressive line. So think about a one-time a year donation to the Patriot Club to help keep us presenting you with this incredible information. I think it's incredible, and I think it's information. And that's our show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.